Hi, everyone. It's great to have you with us. I'm Marissa Kozlov, Vice President at EMARKETER, and I'm joined by Ethan Chernofsky, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Placer.ai. Today, we're going to discuss the latest location analytics to understand retail performance, the state of the consumer, and the key trends that are impacting shopping behavior and overall retail success. Ethan, it is so nice to have you back with us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. So I think what we'll start off is the way we like to, which is just a quick introduction for Placer. So to give a sense of kind of what's informing the perspective that we bring to the table. So Placer is a location data company in the most simplest form of looking at that. People vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of devices. Very critically, this is all aggregate data that has been stripped of personal identifiers like MAIDs. So we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then observe that panel and apply machine learning and AI algorithms to come up with estimations on visits across the country. And we present that data in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from visits, visit frequency, true trade areas, the customer journey, and a whole lot more. And with that, Marissa, I think we can dive in.
All right, Ethan, excited to dive in with you. So I know at this point we are now in May, but let's start off with reflecting on 2023. So when you look at how last year ended with the focus on the holiday season, what were some of the major takeaways for retailers and advertisers?
Yeah, I think this was really important, and it's something that happened after the last time we spoke. So I wanted to make sure we touched on it. But essentially, when you look at the holiday season, there's this tendency to call it the holiday season as if it is a single entity. And what we have seen very clearly is that is absolutely not the case. And instead, it is this longer period made up of very distinct and important distinctions within them, smaller periods within. So, for example, if we think that the holiday season is really now starting to kick off in late October and it's running through late December, if not early January, then we need to understand the difference between the shopper in those different periods. So the person who is shopping in late October or early November, what is the motivation for that individual? Very often it's not how do I maximize the best price? It's how do I ensure that I'm getting the product that I actually want? Right? So the motivation there is very, very different. There's a lot of people who want to check things off of their list. They can avoid that anxiety of, uh-oh, have I gotten all the things I need in time? And then if we move that period forward and we start thinking about kind of that November Black Friday in the midst of all like kind of the hullabaloo, it is another very distinct type of shopper who actually wants to be part of all the madness and the craziness, likely is deal seeking and is willing to wait and play that game of chicken with retailers to try and find that best deal. And then as we go closer and closer to the holiday itself, we have another type of shift in the consumer. So one, maybe even more risky in terms of willingness to play that game and see if they can get the best possible bargain on the product that they want. But even more, that shopper who a couple of days before Christmas is saying, uh-oh, I don't have enough of the gifts that I need, or someone is coming and spending the holiday with me that I hadn't prepared for. And therefore, the motivation is different once again. And then when we think about that post-Christmas period, it's all about gift cards and returns and that opportunity to shop afterwards. And that is, again, another very distinct mindset. And what it tells us is that we can't view these periods as single entities, but we need to view them as distinct stages and align our marketing, our messaging, and our advertising in order to maximize the interaction with the right customer at the right period of time.
Well, I think we're all assessing right now where we stand. Are you an October shopper? Are you the one who's playing the game of chicken? Which one are you, Ethan?
Oh, I am very much an October shopper who has like a panic attack if it's November and I'm not sure what I'm getting my kids.
We can definitely agree with that. I try as best as possible to do it as early as possible. So I'm glad we're in the same bucket there. Well, now that we are a few months into the year, what have we seen from brick and mortar in retail metrics in early 2024? And what could that tell us about performance this year?
So I think it was really interesting because we saw January start off not incredibly well. And there is this kind of uh-oh thinking of like, all right, we had a strong holiday period, but now things are going back without that same level of urgency to kind of the weaknesses or the relative weaknesses that we saw in much of 2023. But that actually turned around quite quickly. So we look at February and March visits, they were significant increases in visits year over year to lots of key categories. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is benefiting, and there are clearly certain segments that are less well positioned and others that are doing much better. But there is this kind of overall pattern of visit increases year over year. And that gives us the latest sign of the resilience of the shopper and the unique opportunity that's existing within brick and mortar retail, something that certainly wasn't a given several years ago, but even a year ago, when there was concerns about how the shopper would respond to economic headwinds and the ongoing nature of those challenges, we've seen tremendous resilience from the consumer, and that's driving a lot of success for retailers in the brick and mortar space.
Well, from a similar perspective, there's a lot of talk about some segments that have been facing some wider economic challenges. Tell us a bit about these segments and how should we understand their performance?
So I think there's a really important conversation that needs to happen around context, right? And that's helping us understand when someone is performing exceptionally well within a specific environment, and others who are, even though the numbers might look great, are doing less well than we might actually think that they're doing. And so I think a really interesting starting point for this is fitness, right? So brick and mortar fitness, again, let's zoom back out to where we were just a few years ago. Everyone was buying a Peloton. We were convinced that people going to gyms was a thing of the past. And yet here we are several years later, and not only is it clearly not a thing of the past, but it has been surging when we look at visits. And that's both visits to chains, and that's driven somewhat by expansions, but even visits to on a per location basis. So the amount of people going to each specific location, which allows us to align for like a same store perspective. And this is incredible growth. Now, the important thing about looking at growth is that it can't continue forever. So for example, if I'm a basketball player and I was scoring 25 points a game and I jump to 30 points a game, that is tremendous growth. That's 5 points a game. If the year after that, I go from 30 to 31 points, that's much less year-over-year growth, but yet the peak I'm hitting is still even more impressive. And I think one of the things that's important when we look at fitness is we are seeing smaller year-over-year growth than they had been seeing in previous years, but that's not a sign of weakness. That's just a sign of hitting this really unique peak. Now, on the flip side of that coin, there are segments that are facing unique challenges. So we think about electronics, when we think about home improvement, and the pull forward of demand and some of the economic challenges. These are purchases that are easier to push off. When we think about AMC, right, had a great year in 2023, but there are going to be unique challenges in this year, partially because of the standards set last year, partially because of the writer's strike and other issues. And so when we judge even year-over-year declines, we need to think about it within context. And that means asking, are we seeing smart decision-making? And how do we think this is going to play out over the slightly longer term, as opposed to being too hyper-focused in on, oh no, the year-over-year growth isn't quite where we'd like it to be. But there are these wider contexts that matter. And I think when we remember that, we do a much better job of judging performance in actuality.
Really interesting to hear some of those challenges, and also to see in your chart on the previous slide, just some of the growth, but then how that continues to change, month over month as you're seeing it from Placer.ai. On the flip side, what are the key trends for retailers and product companies and advertisers to understand and also potentially rally around in 2024?
So I think this idea of like understanding where the customer is at and what things they're being drawn to doesn't just help us understand which products are going to move or which retailers are going to drive traffic. It also allows us to have this understanding of how to message our products, how to get across to the customer, what's kind of moving them on a day-to-day. And there are a few areas where we're seeing some really obvious trends. So one is this continued pursuit of value, right? Discount and dollar doing well, this trading down mentality doing well. Economic headwinds are still playing a role, and the consumer is looking to orient themselves towards value, maybe push off heavier costs. But there's also an element there where they are looking to kind of treat themselves in certain spaces. So we call this affordable luxuries. So think about the coffee out, the trip to the movie theater. There are these segments that are able to take advantage of that in a really unique way. Even beauty and wellness, this ongoing focus, especially post-pandemic, on how do I make myself feel a little bit better? How do I focus on my health, both mental and physical? These are really important trends. And what's interesting is it's not just the places that you'd expect. So we know that an Ulta is well positioned in this space, or a Sephora. But your supermarket is also, when you think about that section that they've dedicated to these products, and even the types of elements that I want to emphasize, the healthy products that I have available, the things that I have that fit within these trends are going to give me an ability to really connect with my audience, especially in this year, in this environment.
Fantastic. Well, now let's move into stores in particular. So a major theme in post-pandemic retail has been the widening recognition of the value of the store. So what does this mean from a media perspective, and specifically focusing on retail media in physical stores?
Yeah, so we love the terminology, the store as a platform, because I think It allows us to zoom out and recognize that the store has never been given the full credit that it deserves for all of the different values it brings. Now, this is also called by many the store as a medium, and I think the store as a medium has a much more media-oriented lens. And I think the interesting thing here is there are powerful elements that make the retail media buzz in the physical environment very, very exciting. And a large part of that is not just the number and the sheer magnitude of visits that come into physical stores, especially when you compare it to online channels, but also the caliber of those visits. So one of the things that was really interesting when we look at top brands, we're seeing anywhere from 5 to 8 times the amount of visit duration in a physical store when you compare it to a visit to their online website. And this makes sense to us, but sometimes we need to kind of reinforce that message. And when we think about it, it's the power that these visits are able to generate. So we think about the visits, plus the visit magnitude, plus the fact that we're in discovery mode when we go into a store and we're more influenceable. The fact that we are so close to the point of sale, the fact that we have a high intent, and the fact that there are other ways to engage us. So I don't necessarily need you to buy a product when you're in the store in order to eventually buy a product or connect with my brand in such a way that it dramatically increases your likelihood to buy that product later. And that's the excitement of retail media. And I'll quote, kind of a mutual friend of ours concept, Andrew Lipsman, who breaks retail media into 3 stages. Stage 1 was retail media in the online environment. I go on, I look for a rice cooker. You show me competing rice cookers, maybe a bag of rice. Stage 2 is, hey, we're breaking into physical stores and we're thinking about digital screens and the like. But stage 3 is where things really get exciting, and we're already seeing elements of this. How do I look on a store-by-store basis and ask about the experiences I can create within a location in order to engage with the customer? And that's going to be done by the retailer. So think of like a Lowe's do-it-yourself concept, which they've rolled out to 100 stores where you have kind of classes like an Apple store experience. And then even things like little mini pop-ups for brands within a grocery store. But it's this unique opportunity to engage with the consumer when they're in a very aligned mindset and looking to be driven in this discovery experience. To engage in that moment is incredibly powerful.
Store as a platform is such an interesting concept. How does this concept widen with the perception of what we expect or even demand from a store?
So I think it's just kind of embracing the idea of a role change. So one of the things that we look at very often is when we think about the true trade area of a location, we'll look at it from the extent of, all right, who's the audience? How do I expand it? How do I reach different parts that maybe I could be reaching? But what if we viewed it from like a fulfillment perspective of what's the actual operational distribution reach that these stores provide? If we think about kind of drive-by traffic, what's the billboard value of that store? What's it bringing to me just from an advertising perspective? Am I seeing uplift in my online channels once the store has been launched in this area? How are these things interplaying? And what's the right way for me to think about what these stores can provide and how they can bring value into the full life cycle? So, it was the CEO of Allbirds who about a year ago said 150% larger basket size when someone visits a store and then goes and shops online than when they go online for their first purchase. So it's a huge impact on what the consumer might purchase, how they would view the experience, the level of relationship with the brand that they're walking in with. But this idea that the store is there to provide more than just a place to make purchases is enormous, because it asks, how are we going to set up our stores? How are we going to create experiences within them? So think like a Burlington shopping experience should be very different from an Untuckit shopping experience. And what it asks is every retailer to say, what are the things I am looking to achieve within a store? What's that wide spectrum of things I'd want to achieve? How do I build an experience that aligns my business goals with the in-store experience that I can create? And to do so that I maximize all of the value of that investment within each physical space.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in that Allbird example that you just gave, it gives the consumer an opportunity to actually try on the shoes and minimize the friction of, will it fit when it comes to me? But also gives them a great opportunity to interact with store associates. And as you said, have that experience there.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's one of my favorite examples, and I gave them kind of a quick shout, but the Untuckit example, I walked into a store in Dallas and you have like an entire row of shirts that are just try me on shirts. And that's a huge amount of space in that store is dedicated to just shirts that I don't actually expect you to buy, but just to help you find your ideal size. It's a really unique perspective on what the store is there to do and the way they view the lifetime value of that visitor. So I don't need to convert you the first time, but I want to give you such a good experience and make sure that the most important things you can do in the physical world are done in a physical store. That is a really big step forward in terms of how I align my priorities for what I want to accomplish in each location.
I love that. I love that example for retail because we often see that within a cosmetic store like a Sephora or an Ulta where you can
100%.
test the product right there. But cool to see that that's happening in retail as well. Pop-ups are another great example of where store as a platform may only exist for a limited time. You specifically note an example here from Shein. How should we view the rise of pop-ups and what does this mean for the store as a platform concept?
I mean, I think it's enormous because it gives tremendous breadth to the application of the store as a platform. So if we think about, all right, you get experience and engagement and brand and discovery. The really cool thing about the pop-up nature is that it creates this powerful win-win-win. So we think about the retailer and the exposure that they get and the ability to engage with audiences to test out what a physical location might be in a certain area, to allow people to engage with products for that long-term value. Then think about the landlord. The landlord gets this short-term boost. So not in this specific one, but we looked at another Shein pop-up in the past. And what was fascinating was when they did their launch, there's a significant increasing of the true trade area. But then even when the pop-up ends, the trade area is still bigger than it was before. So there's this long-term effect of I'm going to draw in people, and a percentage of those are going to stay on and keep on coming to the center over time. And then the last bit is the consumer. The consumer wins. It's interesting, it's exciting, it's urgency, it's differentiation. And these are all the things we're looking for. We don't want the same old, same old. We want something different. And so if retailers, if the landlords can figure out a mechanism to make this happen and happen in a way that is sustainable and efficient, it's going to be better for us as shoppers too, in a way that breaks up the monotony of so much of what retail had looked like in past years.
Great points. You touched on experience a few minutes ago, so let's go deeper into that. We've seen a lot of focus on experiential locations and store concepts. What does this indicate about the future of brick and mortar locations?
I think it indicates this really important thing. And it's funny because we think about it with advertising too. If I look at 1,000 stores, right? And let's say 250 are very oriented towards, I don't know, dads, 250 are oriented towards moms, 250 are oriented towards grandparents, and 250 are oriented towards teenagers. I would ideally want my messaging and my merchandising to be aligned to those audiences in those stores. And so the really exciting thing that's, I think, is taking place in physical retail is the ability to cluster locations and then create experiences and interactions that are oriented towards those specific audiences. So we think about, again, the Lowe's locations with these DIY entities within it, they look very different than the standard Lowe's average location in terms of the audience that's coming. And that's really amazing when you think about it, because it's not just the draw, it's the ability to then target those experiences. And I think retailers are becoming increasingly sophisticated, but so are product companies in asking, hey, what can we do with these stores? How do we break them down into segments that allow us to reach specific audiences with the right message in the right manner? And that ability to then test and scale quickly is going to be huge. But it's this wider understanding that I have a massive footprint. That massive footprint is not a homogeneous entity, but it is different in all these different locations. In some cases, within the same city or state or area, different locations reach different audiences. And if I can maximize on a store-by-store basis my footprint, it is going to be an enormous upside for the retailers, for the product companies, for the advertising available within those retailers, and for everyone involved kind of more broadly.
Right. Well, as you said, where a brand advertises has always been really important. How is the notion of where brands want to be changing, and what does this mean for retailers and product companies?
So this is interesting because I think whenever we look at the data, there's some things that always kind of pop to you as like, oh, I didn't expect that. So this is really interesting because we were looking at certain NFL stadiums and we were comparing them to major malls that were nearby. And what we were finding is in some of these months, you're talking about like there's only 2 games played at the local stadium. In some cases, there was only 1. In some of the months, there was only 1. You're seeing 40, in some cases, like this massive percentage of visits on only 2 actual days. So is there as much volume? No, but there's a tremendous amount of impact. And what this tells us, and I think it's kind of obvious when we hear it, is there is a lot of value to be attained by going to places where we might not have classically thought as ideal retail locations. And so one of the prime examples for us is stadiums, right? You think about a stadium that has a capacity of 60 some odd, 70 some odd thousand attendees. When we're looking at the area of the stadium on a game day, we're often seeing 100,000+ people in attendance, which means a huge portion is never making it into the stadium. If that's the case, why am I not creating more experiences for that audience? Why am I not leaning into that potential to reach tens of thousands of people over a very long, extended period of time when they are a captive audience? I know what they care about. I know the mindset that they're in. They're here for the game. There is so much opportunity in these places, but it expands and extends downtown areas, especially during holiday periods or when there's something exciting going on. There is a lot of short-term opportunity to be grabbed. And just like we talked about kind of pop-ups, this pop-up concept can extend quite a bit and ask for us to ask, where are the places I want to be? Where is my audience? I think there is a much wider answer than we would have classically assumed.
Yeah, and think about the captive audience, somebody being at that stadium for a number of hours, even if they're not even going into the game.
100%.
Yeah. Ethan, one more topic before we close today. What has the consumer communicated about their true preferences for how they want to shop? And how might this dictate retail and media strategy in the coming years?
So I think one of the things that we've seen this year is, again, this is the resilience of the shopper. So this kind of rebound of visits after a rough January. And by the way, a lot of that rough January was due to inclement weather. We've also seen a return of kind of indoor malls, outlet centers, open air lifestyle centers. So across the board, we've seen a big focus on experiences and the ability of those experiences to drive visits and drive longer engagements. And what we're essentially understanding is that there is a very powerful component that is untapped in terms of physical environments, right? And there is a unique ability to leverage those environments to create lifetime value. So like we discussed, how do I get you to come into a store to try on a shirt so you find the right size, and then you can continue shopping online? And I think one of the big takeaways is the power of these physical experiences, the ability to start breaking them down in more and more sophisticated ways in order to drive more value for all parties involved. But then also a broader idea of what omnichannel could be. So I think omnichannel is a very misunderstood concept in the sense that we've been talking about it for so long, we sometimes forget that it's actually still in a very immature phase, right? It's not seamless right now in most retailers when you go from online to offline and offline to online. It's not seamless when I move from desktop to mobile to in the store. And there is so much opportunity in thinking about what are the distinct values that digital experiences, whether mobile or desktop, bring me? What are the distinct values that the store brings me? And how do I leverage all of those channels together? And a big piece of it is recognizing that they shouldn't be the same. I shouldn't try to turn a physical store into a digital experience. I shouldn't try to turn a digital experience into a physical experience. I need to maximize each channel for the unique values it brings and do my best to connect them. And that's unified commerce, omni-channel, harmonized retail, whatever you want to call it. But I think what we're understanding is all elements of that have distinct value. They aren't going away. We aren't going to see an online only or an offline only world. And 2024 and the early results are just the latest testament to that fact.
All right, Ethan, as always, great content. Thank you so much for being with us. Always good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Back over to you, Susie and Jeremy.